Hello, everybody. Today on The Soloists, we are doing a special episode in honor of Giving Tuesday, which is coming up in a few days. And it's a day to be thinking about who we are giving our lives to. So we'll be talking to two people who started nonprofits they never expected to start, but whose experiences working and volunteering in refugee camps in Greece woke them up to needs the world had that people weren't meeting and a call that they didn't expect to feel. So Abe Collier is the founder of Dignity Aid International, and Melissa Robel is the founder of Pads for Refugees. Neither pictured themselves starting nonprofits when they were 20. They had more traditional career paths. Their lives now look nothing like what they imagined, and yet everything in their stories just has come together in a way that feels strangely inevitable. So we talk about the courage it takes to build a life that doesn't match the script, the loneliness and joy of answering a calling you didn't expect, and how sometimes the most meaningful work comes from going where you didn't plan to go. So we hope you enjoy this episode, and let's get into it. Hi, everybody. You're listening to The Soloists. It's just me today, Diana. I think it's 6 a.m. Mallory's time, so she won't be joining for today. And yet we are joined by someone else in a exotic time zone, Abe Collier, who runs Dignity Aid International. And then we're also here with Melissa Robel, who runs Pads for Refugees. So welcome, Melissa and Abe. I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
So Abe is currently based in Ukraine. That's the time zone I was referring to. Okay, so I was getting into this a little bit before, but Abe and I met years and years ago at BYU, and then we've been working together on Dignity Aid International, but it's mainly Abe's baby, which is a humanitarian aid organization that started now 3 years ago. Is that right?
3 years this month, yep.
Yeah, that's right. Just turned 3 years old. And then, Melissa, how old is your organization?
I was 5 in July, but this February will be like 6 years since I got the idea and reserved the handle and made the website and stuff. So
yeah, which buying the website domain, that's often when these things become real, right?
Yeah.
It's so true.
Okay, well, I wanted to talk to you both about your life paths, really, and how you came to the position that you are in running these little organizations that are labors of love, and that I imagine you probably did not expect yourself doing when you were, fresh out of school. As you think about the many, many things you can do with an adult life, how do you really meaningfully fill your time? And as you start to have more of a feel for what it takes to really get things done in the world, some things shift in terms of what feels possible, both in good and bad ways, right?
So my name's Melissa Robel. I live in DC. I guess you brought me on here to talk about my org a little bit, so I can talk about that. But I started it almost 6 years ago after volunteering in a refugee camp, and I worked in a female-friendly space in northern Greece, and one of the things we did was hand out menstrual hygiene products every month, and I just saw, the short story is I just saw like a need for this, and then when I came home, COVID had started, I didn't have a job, it was hard to find a job, and I just couldn't stop thinking about like how much these pads cost every month when we were handing them out. And so I guess one day I was bored and just Googled it to see if there was a problem like this at other camps and other places. And it seemed pretty widespread and no one was really addressing it directly. And I was like, well, I don't have a job. I'll just make up my own job and do something useful. That's how it started. It's not my full-time job. It doesn't make enough to pay me. So I've worked off and on throughout that time.
I started Dignity Aid up in northern Greece. It started from a volunteering experience up in northern Greece as well.
Wait,
and I worked at a
were you in
camp. Yeah.
Were you in Sardis?
No, I was the opposite. I was in the northwestern side of Greece, up by Albania.
Okay.
But I knew people who went to Sardis, and I chose northwestern Greece because I wanted a far out experience away from so many things that I had, experienced before. And it was amazing. But we had a female friendly space, and we had a little shop that we ran. We had a lot of stuff. I didn't work in the female friendly space, but everything else, it rings so much of a bell. And that's like where we started as well with Dignity Aid.
Nice.
So very cool.
Yeah, that's actually crazy. I don't know that I had heard that origin story, Melissa.
I grew up in Utah, California, then Utah, went to BYU undergraduate, did a couple of years in corporate at PwC Advisory in Washington, D.C., which I loved. And then did a year traveling, and that's when I worked in the refugee camps, did a master's degree in France, in Paris, France. And then during COVID, it's same as Melissa, started casting about and thinking, how can I do something that means something in the middle of this mess? And ended up back in Moldova volunteering, and then starting the organization and coming to Ukraine and doing it full time. From there, I think volunteering in Greece, for me, it was the election of Donald Trump. You can edit that out if you need to for the audience. I had already been planning to take a gap year and then start graduate school after that, sort of when I started corporate work. And so even when I was in the big office, I was sort of thinking about leaving. And then Trump got elected and he passed a big thing against refugees. And I got in a big fight with my uncle on Facebook about whether or not we should let more refugees in. And then I was like, well, if we can't let more refugees in, I should do something about this. And so that's when I decided to go volunteer in Greece, which seemed like a sort of place I could understand a bit more than maybe Syria or Lebanon at first.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to edit that out. It's real. And I think we can all take it. Thank you. Melissa, what about you? How did you end up over there?
So I have to like backtrack a little bit, but I worked on the Hill for a little while, and I was getting tired of it, as most of us do. And I was trying to figure out what to do next. And one of my issue portfolios was like foreign affairs. And I think as I worked on the Hill, what I was interested in most was foreign affairs, and then particularly like human rights. But it's a hard place to get into, because you're not just competing with people in DC for jobs, it's people all over the world competing for like a few jobs. So I went back to school and I got a master's of law, like a second law degree in international human rights law at Northwestern. And when I graduated, I couldn't find a job, which seems like a theme in my life. But I ended up coming back to DC, and I was working in anthropology in the art room, like building sculptures for the window displays, which I really loved. But I was like, DC minimum wage, it's not enough to get by. I'm not using this degree that I left my job for and got more student loans racked up, whatever. So I decided to go just volunteer at a camp so I would use my degree. And it was cheaper to go volunteer in Greece with money that I had saved up than to live in DC and kind of like try to survive. A friend of mine, I was looking at a different org, and a friend of mine said, my friend runs this org in Status, you should check it out. And I had written and at the time when I was there, it was mostly a camp for Yazidi refugees, which I had written some papers on for my LLM program. And so I thought, I spent all this time researching like what happened to them. I should go volunteer there. And
But was it Lifting Hands International?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. No, cool. I've worked a tiny bit with them. Met Haley a couple of times.
Yeah, me too. We're good friends.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're really
very
good.
cool.
Okay, question for you guys. How do you guys feel about jobs and the way that jobs provide meaning in life, but they also constrain meaning, right? I know you both are thoughtful, creative souls. Melissa didn't mention this, but she, in addition to, I didn't know you sculpted. That must have been very cool, or doing whatever artsy things you're doing for anthropology. But that is like honestly so cool. But you also play in a punk band. You're like a great local musician here and have played in bands for many years. Abe is like a low-key philosopher, expert in religious studies. Anyway, I imagine you both have like so many things that you love to do with your time, and jobs can both like get in the way of that or aid it. Sounds like for both of you, there's been like lots of different negotiations you've had to do.
I don't love jobs. Like, I don't mind working hard. I mean, I like doing things and staying busy, and I guess some jobs, but like going to an office every day is not my favorite. It's like a constant like conflict in my life. I feel like, I mean, it sounds dramatic. I feel like my soul is being crushed a little every day on my commute. I don't love being in an office all day. I also work at an antique store, and I've worked there for 4 years, so most Saturdays, and I enjoy that. I'm not sitting at a desk. I'm up and moving around. When we get stuff in, like paintings and stuff that need being touched up or like cleaned up or framed, like I get to do that and just kind of like work with my hands. And so, yeah, not averse to working hard, but don't love sitting at a desk and like office life.
Yeah, I mean,
Abe, what about you?
The way that you formulated your life, Melissa, like that speaks to me so much. I mean, I try to come back to, first and foremost, like everyone should live the life that they want to live to the best of their abilities and not hurting other people. But I mean, people who like offices are pretty rare these days, I would say. And I think there's a lot of us who are benefiting from stepping out of that culture. Hopefully, I certainly feel like I have. And if I speak more personally, when I was 20, I imagined myself working in an office for 40, 50 years. And my dad has done that, and he's been amazing. And a lot of good things have come out of that, not least the Salt Lake City airport. I mean, he's had a huge hand in it in 40 years of work. Like, he's done a lot of work on it. But as I sort of did a couple of years, even while I was in the corporate job to going to the office every day, traveling, I was imagining, being a water truck coordinator in a refugee camp in Jordan. That was sort of where I thought my volunteering might take me, which is not that far from what I do now, 10 years later. And I get to work on a computer some days, but then I got to fix a balcony yesterday, and I got to drive a van out to a village last week, and I'm just constantly engaged in different types of things with my head, with my hands, with my feet. And that means a lot to me. It feels maybe like our generation is trying to make a turn towards something more natural and something more organic. And that's not a reflection on anyone who A, chooses a different life for other reasons, or B, on our parents and grandparents who did things differently. But I think it feels like the time it has come for us to maybe make that effort. I hope. At least I'm trying to. I feel good about it for me personally.
Yeah. It seems like what bothers us often about office life, and what I'm hearing in both of your comments, is like just the way that I don't know, you picture yourself like going into a box and just kind of keeping yourself contained there. I guess just like a parallel is both of you are also like, thinking about global issues, right? Which the places that we live and the communities that we consider like relevant to us, those can also be like boxes, I suppose, where we just lop off a whole sections of reality that don't seem like relevant to us at any given point. And it seems like both of you are people who have wanted to sort of like break that open and expand your life, making other people's problems relevant to you that don't necessarily need to be. Anyway, I'm wondering if you see any like sort of parallels there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say two important notes you touched there for me, Diana. One was the more general aspect. When you work in an office full time, it's not that we don't need to do spreadsheets, but when you work in an office full time, you start thinking of the spreadsheets and the data points as the actual things. Whereas if everyone who works in the office also has to go out and help execute the projects and help do the things, you start to see how the pipes are funny and crooked, and you start to see how the plaster doesn't go on like it should on the instructions. And if that lack of specializing in the office can lead to a lot more connection with the work itself, as well as with like your body and the world. So that's the one thing that certainly I wanted to touch on. There was one more,
Yeah,
but I
and
forgot it.
I think too, like leaving the office and going out on the ground, I guess we would say in humanitarian work, I feel like you have a better understanding of what needs to be done if you've been there and listened to the people going through it. And just, I guess what was helpful for me was like my first day in this female friendly space, we were going over what I needed to do. And so we talked about handing out pads, and having not worked in the space or even thought about women having periods in camps and crisis situations before. Like the first thing I asked was, well, why don't we use reusable pads, which I would never use in America, whatever. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why they don't work. Like there's a lot of places don't have water access, so people can't wash their pads. If there's not a private place to dry them where men won't see them, they'll try and hide them, and then they'll like stay wet and get moldy, and that's not good. People just don't want to use them. That's not their preference. Like they want what they're comfortable with. And so there's just like a lot of things that go into it that if I were just some policy person in an office and had never experienced it, I wouldn't know. Just being on the ground and out of the office and experiencing those things helps you understand the context where one works and one doesn't. And I think that's probably similar for a lot of different things in the aid space or life.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of things I've heard from Abe over the years too.
Yeah.
What are some other things you guys have noticed by just like being on the ground with people in need that you don't think you ever would have seen from an office?
And Well, one thing that really stuck out to me when I first volunteered was we did this winter clothes distribution. And I guess this was just, I wasn't familiar with humanitarian work or like giving out aid or whatever, but we like set up a warehouse where the beneficiaries could go shopping. And of course, we didn't have like the options that a store would have or, whatever. It's very limited. It's donations or what the org could buy like in bulk somewhere for a reasonable price. And just seeing like people go through and not seeing things that they want. Like I think people have a perception that someone's in crisis or someone's in need, even here at home, and they're just grateful to get what they want. And I think that's true. But I saw a lot of disappointment when kids had to wear clothes that they thought were ugly or not cool, or someone had trouble finding something that fit. And I think that I just learned that there probably needs to be a lot more like compassion and recognition of like people's wants and maybe remembering people's humanity, like while we're doing this work, that I think over here where we're all relatively safe and removed from that, we don't think about.
Totally.
I'm
Yeah.
so passionate about that. Oh my goodness. And that was actually the organization that I started with in Greece. Their tagline was Aid with Dignity, which we've turned into Dignity Aid International, and love to them. And I hope they can not mind that. Their point with Aid with Dignity was we need to give choice. We want to give agency to these people, and they really do care. And that actually is so close to the point, or so connected to the point which came to my mind when you asked the question, Diana. It being, I find more and more as I do this work that beneficiaries or people who receive help are so eager to be involved in the process, and they love to build things, and they love to be part of the decision-making process whenever that's possible. And they want to be involved, and they want to, create a sustainable community and an environment for themselves. And so it's hard because the money comes from donors who have ideas of how they want the money used, and the volunteers and the staff and the politicians, the local politicians will have ideas of how the money should be used. And you also want to talk to folks, but yeah, that one thought.
Yeah, totally. So I'm hearing from both of you that there's these two sort of insights. One is that maybe like needs are there's nothing more mundane than like a menstrual cycle, right? It's the process that, brought us all into existence. But also, Abe, a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about so Dignity Aid International, one of the things that it does is it does deliveries to rural areas near the front lines of the war that are like harder to access and often missed by larger organizations. And you were mentioning that there's like a real need lately for adult diapers, which is another thing that's just like so gloriously unglorious. That's how it goes. And support for the elderly who are struggling that way. And I doubt that ever is like somebody's mission coming out of, I don't know, some graduate program. Like, I want to be the adult diaper queen. And so on one hand, you have these needs that you pick up on that are just like so unglamorous and mundane, but so critical to just like being able to live a functioning life and get up without your body. But then on the other hand, there's these high level things where like these are actual people. They have agency and thoughts and know their own experience and community and context far better than you ever could. And they want to be involved, and they're smart and have good ideas. And so I guess that's kind of an interesting thing that it sounds like you learn when you're actually just out there paying attention and listening to people, is that there's needs on both ends of like just like the raw facts of embodiment, and then also the human soul wanting to have agency and make decisions in the world.
Absolutely. Melissa, it brings to mind one of the issues I have, which is that fundraising is difficult sometimes to balance with what beneficiaries want. And like they'll want something and you'll know that donors aren't going to love it. Do you run into that problem at all? I feel like that's one I run into.
We don't, because we have a really narrow mission, which is just to provide pads. And I mean, most of our donors are women because I think they relate to what or people with periods, but mostly women, and really all I have to do is like ask people. I'm not saying fundraising is easy, but usually if I tell women what I'm doing, the first reaction is, oh, I've never thought about this. Or if I ask them the worst place they've had their period before, and usually it's camping. And so then it's still a pretty far leap, but I don't know. So that's easy. And we don't have a lot of demands because really all I do is hand out this one product. I think it is nice, and I'm very grateful for that. What is hard, though, is because I'm not on the ground a lot, I partner with orgs that are on the ground, which I think is good because they're the ones talking to the people who are getting the pads. But the only requirements for our grants is that I get receipts to prove like what they've bought, and then photos of some kind of distribution so I can put it on social media. And I follow each org safeguarding rules. So it's hard though, because women don't want to talk about their periods. They don't want to talk. And even if they are okay with that, they're worried about being public and their asylum claims. Aid workers in Greece, as you know, like face a lot of difficulty. So a lot of them are like hesitant to give quotes or interviews. So I think that's where I run into trouble, is just like my Instagram is really repetitive. It's just like boxes of pads and sometimes volunteers or aid workers if they're willing to be in the photos.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're very lucky to have a specialized organization. Melissa reminds me of some challenges we've also had on the beneficiary end, which is people want to feel like people and they don't want to necessarily give interviews or talk a lot about what help they needed and things like that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of sensitivity there. And then there's also the issue of people want certain kinds of food and donors don't think that food is healthy. I remember in my first volunteering experience, there was a big debate over whether we should have chocolate in the package or in the shop for people to select. And I see both ways. I think we went out and bought soda once, and it goes up from there. You know, does the place need a well? For example, we had a debate with an international NGO, non-governmental organization, which is one of the big aid organizations. And on their spreadsheet, they said, the well for this village is functional. They have no needs for further water support. And we were in discussion with the village, and they were like, we need a deeper well. There's been contamination of the water supply. And it just sometimes, you know, those things don't get across, and the donors or the other folks in the system don't quite understand what the local people need. So we have to balance. In the end, it's just a balancing act. Like every work thing that we do, it's, you know, the beneficiaries want this, the donors want this. We try to meet in the middle and make it work.
What do you think it takes to bring something new to the world? What were some of the things you learned as you were just like, okay, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to sort of like birth this organization that doesn't yet exist?
It's been a really hard thing. We used to have quite a bit of entrepreneurship in my family as I was growing up. And so people would talk a lot about how starting a business was really hard, or in my neighborhood. And that's sort of the attitude I've adopted in the last 3 years, is like, this is going to be like starting a business. I'm going to be underpaid and overworked for 10 years. And that's totally fine. I get to do what I love. I get to make a lot of decisions around it. I get to choose the people I work with to a large degree or to some degree. And so there's enough upsides for me that I don't mind the downsides, but it's hard work. Definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life in terms of how much I was capable of at the time and how much I had to learn to survive and thrive. But also extremely rewarding that I managed it. I've lasted 3 years, and I feel like I could do another 3 years very easily here or somewhere else, wherever the need is and where our abilities fit. And I think friends helped me survive that. Lots of prior training, like all of those degrees and experiences sort of do allow you to be a little more independent in the end, I felt, at least for me, and allowed me to have confidence and skills that would allow me to operate in a more independent way. And local folks, I think when I would be the same if I lived in a community in the US or back home, but here my neighbors were Ukrainians, and they were just awesome. As we got to know each other and trust each other, they would give me chances and help me find housing and help find projects and villages to help. And so, yeah, I mean, really learning to humble myself and listen to other people's ideas and work with a team. I had a very small place when I first moved to Odessa and very few friends, and just felt quite lonely and couldn't, buy new clothes or go out to a restaurant very often. In some of the ways we alleviate that when we have larger salaries. Still probably will be a struggle to do that in a way that my petty bourgeoisie roots would like for another 5 or 10 years. which is fine. I get lots of other upsides, and so that's good. But yeah, just some of the mechanisms that I had to outlets, things like vacations were harder to take. And then living in a war zone as well, you do have to be more aware of people who are maybe not from around, or speaking funny, or going a little crazy, or there's lots of options. There's lots of ways in which a war zone is just a little more stressful to live in. I mean, people just blow up at each other maybe more often, even over parking or whatever, or trying not to. So I have to be a bit more on my toes when I'm in Ukraine than when I'm in the US. I mean, there's lots of cultural differences as well, but I think the war was the first time I've lived in a war zone. And I think anyone who comes into this work, into international humanitarian aid, and lives in a war zone or a place affected by earthquake, natural disaster, gets a different feel for how the urgency of life gets pushed up a level, maybe. I think I'd done lots of things to prepare myself for that, and still I had no idea how hard it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. Going straight into a center of like the world's current chaos and a space of violence and injustice, and people just in the instant, immediate place of needing to respond and,
Yeah.
keep
And
waking up and going
I
about
had to
life
be
in that
so
context.
ready. Yeah. And I had to be so ready to leave because of that. I had to be so ready to say, like, I don't have to be strong or tough or powerful, more than I'm capable of. I'm interacting with these people every day, like you said, and they're, being very patient and kind and letting me know, like, it's okay if you can't make it. It's okay if you can't do it. Like, just do your best. And I had a lot of that around me, which was super helpful.
Melissa, where would you begin to tackle some of those questions of like, what was difficult about bringing this new thing to the world?
I think mine aren't as hard as Abe's because am here. But I found two good board members. One went to my human rights program with me, and another I hadn't met in person when I asked her to be on the board, but she had married a good friend of mine, and we were Instagram friends, and I just knew she would be really good at what I needed her to do. So I feel like I had good support starting off, and it was received really well. And I had a lot of good donations in the beginning, but I think what's hard, there's a few things. I add a desk more than I'd like. Like, we don't have a lot of money, so I hand make all the receipts in Adobe Acrobat myself. And so sometimes there's just nights where I put a movie on and make receipts for the last month or two in one big chunk. So I'm stuck at a desk with a spreadsheet, which is not what I've envisioned or wanted in life, but here we are. I think the hardest thing is, since I'm over here and not on the ground, I'm a little isolated from what is happening on the ground. So I don't feel as connected to even the partner orgs that I work with, or the people we're serving, like I did when I was in Greece, going to the female friendly space every day. And then kind of connected to that is when I usually go over once a year, and I can never hit all of my projects in Greece. So I only see people every other year, but it's really hard to go and either see the conditions people are living in, or see people who are happening to just have a rough day because of the stress that boils up from their living conditions and whatever they fled, and to hear aid workers talk to me about camp conditions or different things. It's hard to go and then come back and not be around people who also know what it's like. So it's a little isolating, I think. And this last trip, I went to Greece in September, and usually I stay 2 weeks. I only went a week, so it was shorter. And it was the first time, I think, that I didn't come home from a day of visiting centers and cry. And usually I have a few days of crying when I get home. But so it's taken a long time to build up maybe some kind of resilience to what I do see and hear. Yeah, just the lack of people. And then I'm sure, as people who have lived in DC, you come back and you talk about it, and everyone's an expert on something, even if they've never been to a camp or whatever. So then there's a lot of opinions that may or may not be correct, but just very isolating, I think.
Yeah. Doing any of these things well requires immense tolerance for a kind of loneliness. And especially in a place, it's interesting thinking about you coming back to DC, because this is a city of causes. Everyone has a cause. Everyone has a million things they're championing. And it's not, you can't really get much done if you try to compare or to care about every single one of them. And in your own life, you just kind of have to build in the corner that make sense for you and that you feel called to. But to tolerate the gap in understanding of people around you, I think it is probably something that's a little hard to hold. As well as, I can imagine that too. Building anything, unfortunately, these days really does require a lot of time and spreadsheets and just doing like really dull stuff. But that is the work of caring for people, and learning to like see both sides of that simultaneously is like certainly a life skill. I wanted to ask you two both as well about what you've learned about promoting and marketing and even like fundraising. How has that process of like learning to step in and ask people to give, how has that changed you as a person is something I'm interested in.
I'm going to zero in on the lack of entitlement because that one stuck and I was struck hard. And I think actually it's probably one of the biggest things I've had to work on personally. And I think everyone will have their different journey on it. But I sort of felt like I was a qualified and capable person. And if I went out and started doing lots of work, then I would be entitled to some, support from somebody who should notice me. And I have come to empathize much more with donors over the years in terms of including rich donors, in terms of the amount of pull on their time and their attention that they have, and small donors as well. I mean, your middle class folks are just as busy in their own way given their incomes. And so everyone's really working hard to try to do the best things with their time and money. And so I've become much more respectful of that. And I hope I've become less entitled. I certainly feel like that's been an important part for me, is just to remember that everyone's busy and everyone's working very hard. And I'm a very small part of it. And I can be proud of that. Being proud of that instead of wanting to be proud of something big has really changed the way I approach it, certainly. So that's one thing I'd say.
Yeah, I think similarly. I thought maybe this was just like hubris in the beginning, but I thought people would just be like, oh, yes, of course, I'm going to give you all my money. And that's not true. And I would say I've only had like one big donor, and I'm very grateful for this person because a check shows up in the mail and it is just, we're very small. Even the amount that they send, I think some orgs would think is quite small, but it's enough to keep us going for a long time. But most of my donations range from like $5 to $100. And I think I have right now 25 monthly donors, and most of them are like the $5 to $10 range. There's one woman in particular, she donates $7 a month, but she's a single mom and she's in school and just has a lot going on. That $7 is a struggle for her. And so I've just learned, I guess, with all of this, to not be entitled is to be just very grateful. That $5 or that $7 goes a long way for us. So yeah, I think I've also had to learn to be really grateful for what comes in. And
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, very cool. Abe, the way that you put it, how did you put it? Learning to be proud of something small instead of being proud of something big. I think that starting your own organization, it is like your child, right? And like you're in charge of this and making sure that it grows up healthy and strong and is doing what it needs to. And I'm sure people feel like this about their own children too, like literal children in some ways. It is learning to be proud and to care for something very small. And no one will care about your child the way that you do, right? Even if there's a place for your child in the broader world. There's just such a discrepancy there. And yeah, and I think that can take a good deal of like fortitude and loneliness and just like courage to just keep showing up and doing what you feel called to care about. Yeah, what advice would you give to somebody who is maybe in a similar situation of wanting to figure out what small corner of their world or like something that they feel kind of inspired to do? What advice you would give to somebody trying to discern that and figure out how to like actualize it?
I mean, I would say, it's like a big deal. I didn't think it would be a big deal at the time. There's like some hubris. I was like, oh, well, my friend Haley did this. Normal people can do this. Like she's pretty normal. I don't know. But I'm like, yeah, I could do this. But I think I had already had the benefit of being on the ground for several months and like seeing some of it. So I think maybe if you're, I don't know, like if you want to be a chef, but you've never worked at a restaurant, maybe try like working at a restaurant before you go to school, or, like test the waters a little bit. I don't know. I'm not saying don't follow your dreams, but yeah, I think maybe try it out, but also just do it. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
just do it.
I've,
You'll figure it out.
I'm captivated by your metaphor, Diana. And so I'm going to continue it with having a child. I mean, it's different because you make a conscious choice to start an organization a little bit more. But even that, like most people make a very conscious choice to have a child, especially these days. And so it's quite similar, except without a partner. And even so, like I had a very close friend who was advising me during starting mine up. I imagine, Melissa, you did as well. And folks you talked to who you met, as you said, working on the ground, etc.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I mean, I thought to myself, with a child, what's the basic requirement? When you were talking, Diana, what's the basic requirement? Keep it alive, right? Just make sure it keeps alive. Everything else is kind of a bonus, to some degree. And I guess in that way, it's actually not so different. I would say the founding of an organization came as a surprise to me. When you're 20, I didn't imagine this being my life, though I knew I wanted some adventure or something. So it's not way far out there, but it didn't really. The idea of starting this organization came maybe 5 years ago, and we started it like 3 years ago. And so it's a new dream, and it's something that called to me because of a specific war in a specific place that I didn't even know about 10 years ago. And then I've learned about Ukraine in the last 10 years and came to love it, and then came to love it more through Moldova, and then being here. And every day it is in that way like parenting, I imagine, because I wake up and it's like, how do I keep this child alive? How do I keep this baby alive? And some days it's one thing and some days it's another, and there's a fire in one place and there's a fire in another place. But it is, at least for now, it's very much where I would pour the energies that might go into parenting in a different timeline. I think I pour some of those energies into the organization instead. I'm proud of the ripples we've made so far, and I imagine they'll go on for a long time, whatever happens in the future.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Abe. Thank you. And thanks, Melissa. There's two ways to think about when we feel that lack of meaning in our lives or lack of purpose. I feel like this is something people often say and mourn and grieve over or fret over. I think there's two ways that I think about this, and I'm curious where you fall. There's one where you're like, okay, I need to go do something meaningful. And then you go and identify something that seems purposeful. Like, I don't know, presumably. Or you can just go into the flow of life and try to just get absorbed into whatever you are doing. And instead of meaning being something that you're like focused on, it just arises symptomatically, right? Like being in the flow state of whatever you're doing. So you either try to choose what will bring you meaning and go after that, or you just let meaning just kind of be there. I feel a lot of tension between these two paths, right? Like, do I need to just find contentment in what is around me and let life be more simple? Or do I need to like go and actively build something? I just feel a tension between these two types of pursuing meaning and purpose.
One thing that strikes me is that the call to, like, the hero's journey call, the heroine's journey call, the call to adventure for all of us, it doesn't always come every day. And I'll bet you I've probably passed it up and not taken it sometimes. But it did come like very specifically in Moldova when I was volunteering. And part of it also was, if you will, a little bit selfish, or however we want to call it, in the sense that you were talking about, Diana, like I needed some purpose in my life. And it wasn't so much about needing purpose in my life at that moment as it was I need something to keep me occupied as work, because COVID is ending and I want to, do something else. And this is a possibility, something that would mean something to me. And it's also just very specifically right now that I'm in just the right place that I can make that decision. And so maybe I think my life is much more about now waking up and finding meaning in the day-to-day stuff, because other than occasional emergencies or personal things, I can often know what's going to be happening for the next week. And there's not any big call to adventure in my work now so much, but I'm finding meaning in the day-to-day, as well as making a brave decision once in a while to find some meaning. I don't know if some threads following what you were talking about, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that puts it really well and helps me articulate what I was trying to say, that you can't approach life every single day like a hero's journey. I think that's exactly what I was getting at, is that sometimes being like, oh, my life needs to feel purposeful. If you approach your child like that, like every single day, your child is supposed to bringing me meaning in life, that's not the appropriate question to take to your child. It's not a burden that like day-to-day life can really fill. If you are insisting that life like feel peak meaningful, I think that kind of takes you out of that state of listening and paying attention, just like caring and attending to things that we were talking about earlier. And yet there are times in life, like what you're talking about in Moldova, Abe, where you feel a kind of call and you're like, that is something that I should pursue. And the hero's journey, something arises in you that you're like, I need to walk down this path. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a tension that I think about sometimes as we decide what we want to do in life, that there are times when we need to step up and do something brave and to pursue something higher. And then there are times when it's more in like a maintenance phase and you're called to just care for something because it's there. It's already been brought into the world.
I would be curious, Melissa, about because I kind of had to start an organization because I was going onto the ground and it was do or die. But you coming back from Ceres, you could have not started an organization very easily and continued. Was there a moment that you felt like a call or like a real decision point, or do you feel like it was the natural thing?
I think a natural thing, but you mentioned there was like a selfish aspect to yours, and there was a little bit to mine too, because I had gone to Greece. I saw that there was a problem. I had learned after when I researched that this was a problem everywhere. So part of me was like, yeah, why not? At the same time, I was unemployed. No one was hiring me. I was actually working a temp job when I started it, but like it was going to end. And,
Yeah, I was
it was like a
unemployed too.
3-month
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. And so I was just really frustrated with the fact that I had gone to law school a second time and had whatever. A hill job outside of DC looks much more prestigious than I think it actually is. But I had like these quote prestigious jobs and I couldn't even get interviews. And if I did, I never heard back. And I was like really frustrated. So there was this part of me that was like, fine, I'm going to make up my own job and it's going to be CEO. Like, who cares what these other people want or don't want in my resume? But yeah, I think I'm definitely in like the maintenance part now because really, yeah, it's my org and my baby and my 2 friends that are on the board with me started it. They started out with me too. It's like our baby. But this last time I went to Greece, I was like, these people don't even really need me. They just need me to buy the pads because that alleviates a lot of money that can be used elsewhere. But like, the visits are just tours. In Ceres, I did get to hand pads out, which was a treat because I haven't done that in a long time, but I don't know. They don't really need me. So I just like have to keep it going so they can do the work. But then also, I guess it might be diverging a little bit, but I think also I am maybe having like some kind of midlife crisis where I don't want to go back to an office. When I was 20, I was working on my art degree and playing in a band, and I just wanted to be an artist and a musician. And that's still like, that's all I want to do. And so I feel like this tension between like, oh, I should go out and I should go back to Greece or I should go to Lebanon and like work on my projects or volunteer or do something or like keep up this humanitarian skills that I've gotten or use my human rights degree. But also I just want to like paint and play in a band and like do something for me. And so I have like that tension right now. And part of me is like, oh, I've earned it. This org's almost 6 years old and I'll probably keep doing it because I feel an obligation to like the people in these camps who I've started providing for to keep it going as long as I can, but just want to be an artist and just want to paint and go on tour with a band.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel that so much too. And it's something that I look for even while living in another country. Been very lucky to run into artists and musicians and other folks who are seeking a different wavelength as far as stress and time management and things like that. And so, I mean, even I imagine even if you left, and that's not me pushing you to ever leave the US, Melissa, at all, but we can always use more
I would
people,
love
that's
to.
for sure. But even if you left, I'm sure you would end up gravitating to the same kinds of people, because that's
Yeah.
what makes my work life sustainable, is being able to see those folks as often as possible. I agree.
Well, and you're far from alone. TikTok is full of people like complaining about like this is what modern life is composed of, is you get to sit in an office all day and work in Excel, and like this kind of, as a life, even if you're making a lot of money, feels like really impoverished in a certain way. And I think that one thing that has like come through clear in both of you is that you both like to like listen and be tapped into like what feels real. And I think being an artist and a musician is like one way in which you found yourself able to like really do that. But the desire to just like live in reality and be in touch with it. I think that when we are tapped into that, whatever you end up doing feels better and more meaningful. It would be nice if we could like kind of bridge these worlds better, and instead of like framing the desire to like just live life on the terms that feel like authentic to it, instead of seeing that as like an indulgent thing, if we saw that as like actually kind of essential, and we should be like building our lives on what feels real. And that might mean that you end up in spreadsheets. But if it's like, if you can kind of see the process the full way through, like I imagine that's
Yeah.
something really cool about, like, yes, it sounds like you've kind of come to realize that your place in this system is a distributor, and like you're not as needed like on the ground, but at least you can kind of see your role in this whole process, and that you've like, you know, that this still came from your own listening and discernment as you were in the world and thinking about what people need. And so like even when you are doing the spreadsheet work, you can at least like kind of see how it's all connected.
Well, and if I can speak to that for a moment, I also just, and this came to my mind very clearly when you were talking, Melissa, like speaking from the ground as someone who spends time and meets a lot of these people as they come through. I mean, my life and my home are very much a revolving door for folks who are doing most of their work abroad and then coming in for a week or two to check on things. And
Mm-hmm.
it it is so important for all of us to be doing that. Those weeks and week or two, even though it's stressful for me, you know, I have to make time and make sure that they're comfortable a little bit, and depending on my responsibility with each one, it's so worth it. I keep doing it because I feel like the beneficiary communities and the local communities, getting to meet those people and those people getting to meet the local communities, even though it's such a few days, usually such a few hours, it provides a sense of reality and a sense of connection, which I don't think any of us can do without. And so my instinct would be that even though it feels sort of fake, maybe, and that in part I can vouch from a local perspective, it is fake. We always roll out the red carpet and stack the shelves neatly
Yeah.
and clean things up, but that connection is still, I think, massively needed.
Well, yeah, and I think to like kind of turn it the other way, like I just don't have the capability to be on the ground and do this all the time. I have law school loans I have to pay off, and you know, the wrong passport, so it's harder to stay where I want to stay. So I do need people on the ground to be able to do what I want. So I said, oh yeah, they don't need me, but I know we both need each other. And I'm very grateful that there are people that are taking the time and living in like cramped quarters, getting small stipends to like enable me to provide pads, you know. It's like two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Any last word about your organizations and how people could get involved if they want to?
I think for us, we always just need donations. Just the way we're set up is like I said, we buy things locally. So I don't need people to donate physical goods. So, I mean, really $5 a month goes a really long way. $10 even further. So, I mean, if anyone is wondering how they can help, I'd be really grateful if they went to my website and signed up for like monthly donation or even just a one-off. Giving Tuesday's coming up, so remember us both.
That's true. Yeah.
I'll just say, first of all, a huge thank you to Melissa and thousands, literally tens of thousands of people like Melissa all over the world who do really hard and, as she mentioned, somewhat thankless work of collecting and sending lots of items, pads, rice, generators, and that makes what we do possible, or at least much, much more effective for those of us who are on the ground day to day. And so just a huge thank you to you, Melissa, and everyone else who's doing that. Donations, we're at dignityaidinternational.org. Monthly donations are our lifeblood, as Melissa mentioned. It changes the game with 5 or 10 a month or more. Follow us on Instagram and follow your passions as well. Most importantly, you can reach out to me and try to volunteer or ask me questions as well. If you find me online, I'm in lots of places, and just happy to talk to folks who are more interested.
Well, thank you both so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.